Hi everyone. So I have just watched Logan's Run for the first time in like 10 years, I'd say, and it really did occur to me this time that the film is actually very much full of a lot of hidden depth. And I've spoken before, like in my Forbidden Planet video, about taking films at face value and just enjoying them on that level, which is totally sometimes the best way to enjoy certain films in it. But sometimes you just can't help yourself. You sit there watching a film and things just slap you in the face. Like, you're like, wow, why didn't I notice that before? And how can this sort of really kind of run of the mill 1970s sci-fi film, and it's pre-Star Wars, and I mean, you know, Star Wars changed everything in sci-fi, so it's kind of got that kind of 70s charm to it, that that sort of, you know, yeah, which don't really get in any other type of like science fiction film like after Star Wars. And I think the director's done an amazing job at really burying this sort of subtext in there for you to sort of dig it out. I mean, it stars Michael York as Logan 5 and Jenny Agutter as Jessica 6, and I think it's something Jordan. I have to check it out, as Francis 7. Um, Obviously, 1976, that's like a year before Star Wars. Um, let's dive in, shall we? Okay, it was actually Richard Jordan. I'll just actually check it out online. Um, let's dive in. So the film sort of, I think it starts kind of weak. The film, the dialogue is there's a lot of exploratory information given to you in the dialogue, right off the bat, and it does sort of make it seem a little bit unwieldy to start with. The sort of dialogue throughout, like the beginning, definitely like half hour or so of the film. There's also that title card where it explains to you, due to overpopulation, pollution, and war, humanity is retreated into these domed habitat cities, kind of thing. Um, those were all just major talking points of the 70s. People was really concerned about pollution in the 70s. People were really concerned about, obviously, the threat of like the Cold War turning up. Maybe you had the Cuban Missile Crisis like 10 years before. You'd also had like the Vietnam War and close scrapes and stuff like that throughout then. And you also got the threat of overpopulation as well, they mentioned, and that I think that was a big deal for them in the 70s. I have to check that out. I'm assuming it was. I think this idea of retreat as well, kind of thing, into these cities, and that I think that's possibly it, like a cultural symptom of American declinism, that I think they were sort of feeling at the time. I mean, sort of post Watergate and all that kind of stuff. I don't think America was feeling at its most confident throughout the 1970s. The special effects in the film. Now here's the thing with the special effects. I'll dive a bit deeper into that. So the actual normal special effects, all right, with the exception of the fact there's no lasers in it, and you sort of think to yourself, come on, it's a 70s sci-fi film 1 year before Star Wars. They can afford to put a bit of paint or a bit of like ink or something across a bit of film and make it look like a laser. I mean, they was doing. I mean, the same year as making that, they was making Space 1999, and that was like a television production. And they had these sort of effects, but they don't. And but other than that, I think the effects are okay. They hold up, with the exception of the cityscapes, the camera panning across the city, and I everybody pans the film for this. They go, "Oh, that city looks like the model they made to show the producers what the real set of the city was going to look like, you know, if they had the money." I am inclined to believe it was probably a bit more in that, because it looks like a toy. It looks like Toy Town. This city, it looks like a model, like a toy, it could be a doll's house or something. And it's inhabited by children, isn't it? You know, it's a toy town full of children. That's why it's them. I think my personal opinion is it's the director making a bit of a statement. Um, Moving on, I think the film is definitely, a lot of people say when they kind of analyze the film, they say it's like a reaction. It's like the the children of the 60s and that sort of 1960s sexual revolution and liberal revolution of the 1960s were hitting adulthood in the 70s, and they were sort of becoming disillusioned with those kind of countercultural values. um, I think there's definitely a big element of that. um, or it could be a conservative reaction to that as well. The filmmakers could be coming at it from a conservative point of view, because it does end in a kind of conservative way you kind of think people sort of lead this hedonistic childlike lifestyle, and they sort of settle down into a monogamous kind of pretty standard heterosexual relationship with each other. So that there is that going on there. But there's a scene in it where they call it carousel, and it's a rotating carousel where 30-year-olds are launched up in front of a baying mob of teenagers and 20 somethings, where they're publicly executed. Sort of a slightly less socially toxic version of TikTok, I think. And I actually think that, yes, that could be very, very metaphorical and very, very sort of on the nose about this kind of idea we were talking about a moment ago, about this kind of like this revolution from the 60s. But I actually don't think it, but I got interrupted, so there's a little bit of a cut there. I was just saying, but I think the real violent revolution that happened throughout the 60s was the Chinese Cultural Revolution. It was about, I mean, those kids in China, they basically was about to eat the country alive. They was brutal to their elders. They dragged teachers out of classrooms and beat them severely, and that scientists was dragged out. Anybody they felt wasn't culturally rigorously communist enough and Maoist enough, they really did punish. And that's what I think that's driving at, because these 30-year-olds are shot up and they're killed. So that's that one. That's where I think that the director is possibly aiming at with that. um Moving on from there, this whole the whole film is full of these references to the fact that these are just children. These aren't mature adults at all, even though ostensibly they are adults. I mean, Logan is, I think he's meant to be about 27 or something like that, and Jessica's meant to be about, I'd say about 19, 20. They're not, they're a culture of very mature people leading this very hedonistic lifestyle. Um, I think one of the shows for that as well is like the internal sets. They look very much like a shopping mall, and then everybody said that's like because it's the culture at the time. It was a sort of kicking back at this sort of consumerist society that was really sort of taking off in America at the time, and weren't long before it was going to hit Europe and we was going to get them. But I don't think it was that. I think it was just more. It was more straightforward. It was like kids hang out in malls. That's what they do on a Saturday morning in America. It was part of the thing for them. So there is that element to it. Moving on. So another thing I noticed as well is that out of everybody in this domed city, you've got the two main characters, these star-crossed lovers, who's it will emerge to be. You've got Logan Five, and you've got Jessica, and the characters and the background characters in the city all wear colours that denote their identity. And when you're a child, your identity is sort of pretty set as a child, and then you sort of hit puberty, and more ideas come into your head, and your identity sort of changes, and your own thoughts become more malleable, and you start to see shades of grey and things like that. So everybody, and this is what's happening simultaneously with Logan and Jessica. Jessica's sort of pondering, maturing into being an adult woman. She's sitting there thinking about having babies and things like that. Not that I'm saying all women and young girls think about having babies all the time. Of course not. That's sort of that's archaic to think that way. You know what I mean? It's the sexist way to look at it. But what I'm saying is that character at that time, that's what she's thinking about, and it's a sign that she's maturing. And Logan's maturing as well. Logan's thinking about different things. You can tell he's down at the nursery looking at his replacement baby and everything like that, and he's feeling quite paternal on things, and you can tell by the way he interacts with younger cast members and younger characters that he's quite paternal towards them, and she is the same. And I think that the whole thing about his colours is, if you look at Logan, his costume for this period of the film, for this part of the film where he's going through his metamorphosis and his change from boyhood to manhood, shall we say, he's got a great big shade of grey across his chest, and I think that's the director visually telling us that Logan is changing. He's starting to see the subtle shades of grey that happen in life, and it is true. And it's when you're a child, and believe me, I've got 4 kids. I know how kids think. They go through certain phases. I mean, for instance, my youngest son, there's no shades of grey with him. If I say to him, go next door, go and speak to our neighbour, ask her for a cup of sugar, and don't talk to anybody on the way back, he's going to think that he has got to do that, and no matter what happens, like, that's the thing that he will accomplish. If, say, for instance, he encounters somebody injured on the way, those shades of grey won't kick in. He's been told he's got to go and do that, and he'll think, oh, you know what I mean? Whereas my older son, if that was to happen, he'd know. He'd be like, oh no, Christ, this person's injured. I better run back and get my dad and help him. You know, it's like, and that's what I think the director's saying. It's like the sort of idea of moving away from childhood into adulthood. I think it also sort of ties in as well with this concept in the film. If they run off and they get new faces, they go and see a plastic surgeon, and he lasers them, and it's quite a big plot point in the film. Logan goes on the run, hence Logan's Run, and he's going to go and get a new mush. And I think this whole idea of just changing one's face, that's definitely tying in with this idea of when you hit your teenage years, your identity itself is just so malleable. It changes from week to week. You know, I mean, we've all had that phase of, oh, I'm a goth this week, or oh, I'm a skater boy this week, that kind of crap. You know what I mean? So I think definitely he's saying something like that. This is all very sort of sledgehammer kind of interpretations. But like I've always said with this channel, it's just my opinions. I'm not qualified. I'm just a guy who loves sci-fi. Moving on. So one of the big, one of the only symbols you really see in that film is this Ankh symbol, which is it is an ancient Egyptian symbol of renewal and life and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, going back to my previous comment about this sort of 60s countercultural revolution, that symbol from the 60s to nowadays has just been part of the counterculture. It's just part of that lifestyle. Everybody from goths to cyberpunks and all that kind of crap, they love that. I'm not going to dwell on that because many other YouTubers that know a lot more about the subject than me have dealt with that, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to mention though that this whole idea I mentioned as well a minute ago about Jessica and the maternal side of her sort of just starting to come throughout the film, and her growth. as a character. There's a scene in sort of the middle of the film where she's sort of with Logan, and they're going to go down to this place called Cathedral, and it's like the ruined part of the cities where the people that aren't adjusting very well to this lifestyle live, and it's for the kids. And the first person they meet is this little girl who nicks her bracelet, and then they meet a gang of kids. That entire scene, I didn't even realise it when I first saw that film because it completely went over my head. And I'm probably going to sound like a complete mug when I say it. That is completely and utterly a Peter Pan scene. I mean, the kids are even wearing green tights in it. I mean, I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, this is complete Peter Pan. That little girl was meant to be Tinkerbell and everything. And these are the Lost Boys. This is Peter Pan in this film, in this city where they don't grow old. And you've got Logan there, you know, being whoever, being quite paternal towards him, and actually kind of talking him out of any violence and using non-violent methods to sort of deal with the kids. So yeah, there's a complete scene in that where they completely and utterly do a Peter Pan reference right in your face, and it just slipped me by. I'm like, what? Yeah, there's that. I think the little girl scene as well. There's a scene after that, just straight away after that actually, where Jessica encounters that little girl as well, and she's sort of sitting there looking quite scruffy and quite sad, and you do feel sorry for her. You know what I mean? It's quite an emotive little scene, and I think from that point on as well, you're starting to see change in Jessica towards being a more completed woman rather than a little girl, because she's very kind to the child. When kids meet other kids and they don't know them, and one of them's jarred the other one off like that, they're horrible to them. I mean, she'd snatched the bracelet back off her and give her a dig or something like that. But not her. All of a sudden, straight away, she's quite maternal towards this little girl. She's quite sensitive. She's soothing. It's like she wants to comfort the child like an adult as well. And in a way, it's quite subtly quite a powerful little moment because there's no dialogue there. It's all acting between Jenny Agutter and this little girl. By the way, Jenny Agutter, for all the sci-fi fans out here, did make a cameo in Red Dwarf. Yeah, she was in the season 6 episode Sirens. She played Crichton's creator. Yes, Professor Manet, I think her name was. Yeah. So anyway, we move forward with the film. You have several scenes that are sort of designed purely and simply to sort of highlight the hedonistic nature of what these kids are living in this city. They've got nothing real in their lives and only live till 30. Logan is put on a mission by the computer that runs the city to go on the run, and the other characters who he works for a group of people called the Sandmen. Again, that's a reference. That's a childhood reference again, isn't it? Because the Sandman's going to put you to sleep, you know. Logan's job is to hunt down anybody that's trying to escape from this carousel thing and gun them down with his mate. And no Sandman has ever gone on the run before, but he meets Jessica on this thing they call it circuit, and it's kind of like what it is. It's like they just beam people straight into your living room for you to have sex with. It's kind of like a sort of slightly less culturally toxic version of Tinder, and years ahead of its time, by the way. And it sort of is as well. It's sort of demonstrating kind of how liberal and progressive their society is as well. Because remember, this film was made in 1976. Yet Logan shows no issue at all with the thought that Jessica may be gay, for instance. And there's another scene later on, again demonstrates this. They escape through the love shop, and it's just a massive 1970s style orgy full of 1970s style fucking furry muffs. Yeah, Emmanuel in 2027, mate. So he goes on the run, but his friend Francis can't cope with this. He's chasing him, and they escape through the city. They end up in the sort of ruins and back end of this city, and it's sort of like the grimy side of it you don't see. It's the industrial underneath of the city, and then they end up having to go up above the city, and they bump into a robot which is played by Roscoe Lee Brown, I think. Brilliantly, actually, he's quite menacing for a lump of what is effectively like bits of tin foil and bits of venting and all that kind of stuff glued together cheaply. He's quite an effective looking and menacing machine, and he's been plugged up at the top of this city for years. And what it transpires is his initial job was to take the natural resources out of the environment, like fish and all that kind of stuff, make it into food for the city. But what's actually been happening is, in typical Soylent Green style, that food supply dried up, and he's got everybody that's ever ran, and all the people from Carousel presumably, all in deep freeze. I think he's converting them into food. So they have to beat a hasty retreat. And it's at this point as well, which I add, remember I mentioned the colour coding to the outfits and how key they are to their childhood identities. Jessica and Logan actually sort of, they lose those outfits. They sort of they start wearing furs and all that kind of stuff for this scene because it's cold and whatnot. They eventually escape from this and they make it outside, and they travel and they cavort and they do the stuff that teenagers are going to do when they're on their own. They think their parents ain't looking with each other. They do a bit of skinny dipping. They mess about and all that. But ultimately, what's happening is these two are bonding under really dire circumstances. They're still quite childlike, but at the same time, they're not children no more. And at this point, they encounter the ruins of Washington DC, and they're traveling through it, and they encounter a lone survivor out there, portrayed absolutely just brilliantly by Peter Ustinov. And his performance is really subtle, right? Because when you look at it at face value and you glance at him, he seems like he's been on his own for years. He seems like the kind of person that's been living in isolation for most of his life, kind of thing. He's not, don't even remember his own name. But when you look at the subtleties of his performance, he's not actually doing that. He's doing that kind of, the way we've always got that, everybody's got that old relative, haven't they? That when you was a kid, they had a way of talking to you, which you just loved. You was really affectionate towards them. And they were talking to you like you were a kid, but making you feel like a grown-up. That's what he's doing in that scene. It's quite subtle. He starts telling them about the world and all that, and I actually think that's allegorical as well for this concept as well of the second childhood, because he, for all I'm saying, like in one breath, I'm saying to you, he's playing it sort of differently. He's also playing it quite childlike. And trust me, I'm the person who's been attempting to go from their first to their second childhood without the usual interlude, but it's not working. There's this concept as well. So that kind of, Jessica and Logan had never seen an old person before. They're looking at paintings and they're like, Jesus Christ. They go to the Lincoln Memorial and they're like, is that what old looks like? And she's asking him, she's going, old man, does the cracks in your face hurt? And I tell you, they don't, yeah. I mean, they hurt to look at. So there's that. Eventually, though, Francis catches up with them because he's been chasing them this entire time, and they sort of duke it out. And this is an important thing again when I'm talking about costuming, because Francis has still got that shade of grey across his uniform there, whereas Logan has shed that shade of grey and his uniform is completely black. I think that's the director signalling to us that he's now formed his identity as an adult man, and Francis is still a boy. That's crucial. They have a fight and Logan wins the fight, and they go with the old man. They go back to the city. They try and warn people about Carousel, don't work. They end up giving the computer an epi, and it ends up like spazzing out, blowing up, and all of a sudden, all these young kids now have had their cosy little catastrophe, and they now have to live in the wild, the real world kind of thing, and they all converge on the old man, and they sort of accept him as like a dear old uncle kind of thing. I mean, Peter Ustinov must have been loving it. So that's the basic plot of the film. That's what I think is going on with a lot of the film. So you'll see a lot of people talking about the film with these kind of biblical sort of tones and stuff, and it's like about expulsion from the Garden of Eden and all that. And they are 100% right, because that is so going on there. It really, really is this kind of seeking out of the of forbidden knowledge, and you know, everything, like it's even down to the way that Jessica and Logan are sort of posed naked for their last few moments that are within this city, and then they put on clothes and then they go end up outside of the city. There's that, but I really think my interpretation of it is a bit more simple than that. I think it's a story. It's a standard teenage soppy love story, and it's about these two characters, these two boys, and they're the bestest of buddies. You've got Logan 5 and Francis 7, bestest buddies in the world, do everything together. But one of them's more mature than the other. One of them's going out there. One of them's changing. One of them's growing as a person, and he encounters a girl that is on the same journey, and they're very attracted to each other. And it's the story of a girl coming between two best friends. It's the story of growing up and maturing, leaving your childhood friends behind, leaving your childhood hometown behind, and going out into the real world, leaving this plastic city, this toy town city, this city of that isn't real, this fake kind of existence, which is childhood, because you build these worlds around you in your childhood, these sort of walls and boundaries, you psychological barriers and stuff you put up as a kid to protect you and all that, and you hit the real world, and the real world is cold, it is tough, and it is hard. And that is what this film is about. This film is about growing up. That is all it is about. And it's also, like I said, it's also a love story, and it's also, I mean, put it like this, it's at the very beginning of the film. Logan 5 and Francis 7 are best friends. But the only thing in the world that can come between 5 and 7 is 6. Jessica 6. So Logan and Jessica, so them two have matured, and they leave it behind, and they discover the perils of adulthood together. That's what the film is about, and it is done wonderfully. It is a really, really good film. It's like I said to you at the beginning, that some of the effects look a bit tacky, and I'm trying my damnedest to run cover for how crap that city set looks. But yeah, I think it's a film full of hidden depths and hidden meanings, and I like it. It's a guilty pleasure. Again, it's another sci-fi film my bloody dad introduced me to, so I've got nothing but fond memories for it. I mean, I can remember. I mean, that film was pretty saucy. They used to put that film. I remember waking up on a Saturday, and that film was on a Saturday morning on BBC Two. That film is pretty saucy for a Saturday morning, you know. But, yeah. Go and check it out. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you agree with me. Tell me if you don't. You know? Subscribe. I'd like you to subscribe, because that would really help me out, because I'm trying to grow this channel. Yeah. Anyway, that's about all.